What's up, everybody? Do you sometimes struggle with living life? Me too. Well, today's
Yeah,
episode,
it's
we're
hard.
talking we're talking about how to live intentionally, why living in the present looks different than when you're looking back on it, and a much longer title that Danny wanted to add to that. So, this is the
Yes.
Existential Stoic podcast. I'm Randy. That's Danny. What's going on, Danny?
What's up, Randy? I'm a
Yes,
big
so
fan of
this
descriptive
oh my goodness, this
titles.
is an interesting one. I think we have a lot of stuff to cover on this living intentionally,
Yeah.
living in the present versus looking back. So what brought this idea about?
So what I was thinking about was like, some things happened in my life. And like I had this moment where I was really grateful that like we had started like you had wanted to start the boot camp program we're doing at a certain time. And I was kind of hesitant at that time, but I started with you because you kind of like, I wanted to start with you and all. And I'm looking back, it's like, sometimes things feel like fate or they feel like, they just fall into place nicely. And like given how things turned out, like it really worked out well for me that I had started at that time. And so like I was just thinking about that. I thought how like funny it is that like a lot of times like in hindsight, we look back and things seem like they just fall into place because we kind of are telling the story and all. But in the moment, it's like not clear. And then I was thinking about how like, living intentionally when we know what we're doing, when we know who we are, when we're trying to live that life, that like it's funny because it's like it's not always clear in the moment whether we're doing the right thing, but then like we become who we are and we look back and like I'm not sure if we're like making sense of it after the fact or like and we're just telling that story or if you know what I mean? Does that make sense? I know it's a
Oh,
little
dude, 100%. Like looking
yeah.
back on it, it almost looks like it was done to me, you know?
Yeah,
But
yeah,
like in the
dude. Like
moment, I feel like I'm doing it.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's funny too, because like even like, I look back on my life and like, like yeah, like don't get me wrong. There's plenty of things like I'm working on and like I want to be different and all, but like I'm really happy with who I am now. And I look back on my life and it's like part of me knows like all those things that happened to me, all the things I did were part of like that's telling that story and making me who I am. So it's like you don't want to get rid of anything because then you'd be a different person, right? But it's like that means, and that means even like our worst days, our worst experiences, they're also part of that story. And it's funny that looking back, they often get like this way more positive angle than when you're living it, because when you're living it, it's horrible.
Hmm.
And like, I'm talking about my worst, it's like terrible, and then it's like, so it's interesting how that happens.
Okay, so here's something that I just thought about when you were saying that, how it always feels a lot worse. So there was this study that I heard about like championship athletes. And basically they found out that when you lose, the feeling stays around for a long time, like hours, days, weeks, sometimes even a lifetime, depending upon how big the loss is. But when you
Oh, I'm sure if it's like
win,
second place in the Olympics, that's probably forever.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
yeah,
Or second place in the spelling bee in second grade. I'm still,
yeah,
you
never gonna
know,
get over
I
that.
had flourish and he had magical. Come on, magical. Come
Oh,
on. Yeah.
that's not even
Who
that's not
knew
even fair.
flourish in second grade? My goodness. But anyways, I digress. Uh, but
I was a terrible speller, so I don't. He never entered.
uh, the feeling from winning only hangs around for a couple hours. So
Yeah,
perhaps that's why looking back, the things seem a lot brighter because we're so much more susceptible to these negative feelings, particularly in the moment, that looking back, it feels good. But
maybe that is right because if you carry that negative with you, but then you get to the place where you want to be looking back. That all just becomes. I think sometimes too, it's like it all becomes part of the story, right? Of how you got to where you are, because we're constantly telling ourselves a story to make things meaningful,
mhm.
and it's like once you start, and I think this is what's so important about living intentionally. Once you start living intentionally and directing your own life and making your own life, you know, I think it's inevitable that things start going your way, things start getting better. And then it's like all of a sudden that narrative you have in your head of your life and all just starts changing in a more positive light. It's really interesting though how this like the psychology of it and all.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's definitely hard in the moment when things that we interpret as bad are happening or uncomfortable or painful. It's definitely hard in the moment to recognize that those could be positive. Because
Yeah.
there's like
Yeah.
that story of the Zen master or whatever, and he his horse runs away, and the town people are like, "Oh, what terrible luck!" And he's like, "Maybe yes, maybe no." And then the next day, the horse comes back with like seven other horses, and everybody in the town is like, "Oh, what great luck!" And he's like, "Maybe yes, maybe no." And then the following day, his son's trying to break the horses, and he ends up breaking his leg. And everybody's like, "Oh, what bad luck!" And he's like, "Maybe yes, maybe no." And the next day, the army comes to sign up people in town, and his son's got a broken leg, so he can't sign up for the army. And everybody's like, "What great luck!" And he's like, "Ah, maybe yes, maybe no." And it's kind of like you never know if things are going to be good or if they're going to be bad. But still, in the moment, oh my gosh, I like fight so hard against things that are uncomfortable and don't feel good and
Oh
painful.
yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Oh yeah. And dude, it's like, no, I think that's a great example too, because it's like, you know, whether we see things as fortune or misfortune really is just a matter of interpretation, and usually isn't something we know honestly until later, because we don't know how it's going to turn out. Like, yeah, everybody, if you ask anybody right now, like winning the lottery, that would be lucky, right? A good thing, right? A good positive thing. But then if you look at statistically after the fact, for a lot of people, it is not a good thing. It's actually a negative thing. It actually makes their life harder and worse. And so it's actually interesting that, like, things we think would be positive fortune actually end up being negative after the fact. And it really just, we don't know until later. And I think that when you're talking about, trying to live your own life, I think this is where it gets really difficult, because, like, you know, you try to make the best choices you can. You try to do things at the right time. You try to respond to the opportunities before you, but, like, at the end of the day, you don't really know. Like, if you know yourself, you can make informed decisions, hopefully, and hopefully, like, you're listening to yourself. But, like, I think that's the interesting part too, is because for so long in my life, and I know for you too, like, we weren't making those decisions for ourselves, right? So it's like, you're making all these decisions. You think you're doing something right, but in the end, you're not really. It's like, you're just going in circles, kind of.
Yeah. And like
Yeah,
the another interesting thing to look at is when other people drive you nuts and you're like, how could they do that? Are they a freaking moron? But like
yeah,
then realizing, everybody's just trying to do the best they can given their current circumstances. And like trying to
yeah,
understand that is just such a mess to wrap my head around because, like there's just like there's these people who just stand in the middle of the doorway on their phone and they just don't get it. And I'm like, somehow
yeah,
I'm like, well, they're trying to do the best they can. Like clearly there was a very important message they needed to answer right there at the threshold of the doorway. So yeah.
yeah. Yeah, no, it is. It's funny. I think it can make you more, like, patient with other people. Hopefully, it is funny though too, because it's like what I think you mentioned the other day about Steve Jobs. You were saying, like, how all these things in his early childhood, like, it was almost like he couldn't not become who he became, right? Like, it was almost like impossible. And I think it's funny because a lot of times too, this is the other side of it. Like, we see the end result, but we don't see everything prior to. So, like, and the news loves to say, like, oh, this breakout, you know, person
Overnight
became a billionaire in a
success.
second. Yeah, exactly. And you don't see all the things beforehand. You don't see all the circumstances. You don't see all the opportunities they might have had, or just how, like, even if they didn't have a lot of opportunities, how they had the right ones for them at the right time. Like, there's so many factors involved. And I think this is what was interesting to me too was about it was, like, this idea that, we kind of just have, like, I don't know, an amalgam of, like, possibilities that are, some are, like, conditioned by, like, circumstance, time period, all of this. And, like, we have to make it intelligible to ourselves and meaningful. So we just have to kind of, like, start building this story, and hopefully we're right. Because, I don't know, it's weird. Hopefully it's positive. I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah. Because yeah, it is part of building that story. And it doesn't matter whether the story's true or not, because in the end it's just a story. It's fictional,
Yeah. Yeah.
but fictitious. But we just think because it's our story, it's true.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny too, because they've also shown, I mean, I think we talked about before, like, how, like, you know, being optimistic, like, most people, like, there is a certain level of, like, self-denial or delusion or lying to ourselves. It's kind of necessary to, like, keep that energy level and motivation and willingness to go on. We're a really funny kind of in a funny situation, I think,
Mhm.
and it just is interesting how, like, so often, like, I find myself where, like I was saying earlier, that experience where, like, I realize something that I'm grateful for, but after the fact. It's not during, but I realize, kind of, because it's like things seem to fall into place. Or maybe said, just because I started then, I had more opportunities now. It's like, and I'm just looking at it from the wrong angle. I don't know.
Well,
It's hard
it's
to say.
I heard this thing about optimism the other day in his book Goodbye Things, a really good book on minimalism. Uh, and it was like equating the minimalism with owing to happiness just because we're so overwhelmed with possessions, we can't, our brain's overloaded and we can't even focus
Oh
on being
yeah.
happy anymore. But the thing that it was talking about was it took a look at like happiness and contentment in people, and 50% was genetic. So like they took twins who lived in completely different circumstances, and they
Oh,
they always had like a pretty good correlation in terms of general happiness. So like there is some genetic
okay.
component to it, but it's only 50%. And then what everybody thinks is important, the circumstances, so getting rich, getting the ideal partner, having the ideal house, the car, the watch, all that stuff only accounts for 10%. The other
Makes sense. Yeah.
largest part, the 40%, is actually our mindset and our habits.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing that really accounts for most of our happiness. The only part that we can actually have any real impact on, and it's what people don't even look at.
Yeah, it's funny because I in my own experience I found that like, I find that like the as you have like better habits, better routines, you're also every day you're more active kind of working for yourself, working towards what you want because those habits are something you're building intentionally, right? So it's something you want and you kind of have more control. So you have a little bit more leverage when things go bad or when you're having a bad day to kind of keep yourself going in the right direction, I think. And it just, yeah, it's way more beneficial for us for our happiness, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It's really interesting. It's funny you mentioned that about like, people think like most people think like it's getting this stuff, right? There was this commercial I saw the other day. It was I think it was for like State Farm or something about like how like you can tailor your insurance, you can get as cheap as you need it. And the commercial starts with this guy like crying, saying goodbye to his delivery guy. He's like, I can't order any more stuff. I don't have enough money. And the State Farm agent is like, that's okay. You can just adjust your policy. You don't have to say. I'm like, so what? You just keep like obsessively buying shit online.
Yeah.
But I think that's the problem. Like, yeah, I mean, I remember times in my past where like I was like depressed and like, you do the consumerist thing is go spend money, right? Because it's like it's not making you happy, it's just distracting you. And half
Mm-hmm.
the time, like I remember like, when I look back, the stuff I bought at those times, I didn't even really want. It's just like it's stuff you forget about instantly.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like the more I focus on how I want my life to go, the more I focus on my mindset and stuff, the less I even find myself wanting any new stuff. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of funny how the more you focus on your mental happy state of being, your life, your goals, the less that stuff becomes important. Unless it's necessary for something you're doing. But other than that, like it just doesn't matter.
Yeah. So in this book, Goodbye Things, I found it to be like a very, very good book. So I would recommend it for anybody looking for a good book out there. It's short, easy read, a few hours, but it's I found it very impactful.
I was hoping it wouldn't be long if it's on minimalism.
Yeah, right.
It's like a
It
thousand
was
pages.
4 volumes.
Yeah,
That's good.
that'd be really
Uh,
funny.
yeah. So one thing that he said was like most of us focus on getting happiness by multiplying the items that we have, thinking that then if we pay the same attention to multiple items, we'll be happier. But he says that actually you could pay twice as much attention to less items and get the same amount of happiness.
Yeah.
And it's just like I've seen that at times in my life when I have gotten rid of a lot of stuff, and oftentimes that's been when I've traveled and I had to just like one
Yeah.
time when my brother and I moved to Florida, we sold everything we owned and just took what we could put in a car and then drove down to Florida and like started
Mm.
over. But it was cool because we got rid of all this junk we were holding on to forever. And then when we got to Florida, all we had was stuff that we really liked.
Yeah, you need it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dude, it's funny. I did that. It's funny you mentioned that because I remember when I went to not an undergrad, but when I went to grad school, like I went out there with a bunch of stuff. And then when I had to leave, it was 2 years later, I was like, I don't want to bring all this crap back. When I'm driving back, I don't want to bring all this crap. I want all fit. So I just went through and started, gave stuff away, got rid of stuff. And I came back and then after that, like each year, because I moved every year for a few years, I just started getting rid of more and more crap because it's
Yeah.
just easier. Like we don't realize it. Like as soon as we're like in a place for a while, we just accumulate junk that we don't need. Like, and it's just, yeah, it gets overwhelming. It
Hmm.
does.
Well, it's like, okay, so it's like the topic of this episode, living intentionally. He talks about how most of us don't have the habit of minimalist living. And the habit
Yeah.
is one in, one out, or one in, multiple out. You know, most of us
Yeah.
don't have that habit. We just have one in.
Yeah. That's it. Just keep putting them in. Well, it's funny you mentioned that too, because the thing I was thinking about, like, I've noticed I think as you start taking more direct control over your life and your choices, you start realizing, like, we talk about every choice is a choice not to do something too. And I think for myself, what I've noticed is like I have a lot of hobbies and stuff, but like because I don't buy a lot of extraneous stuff, I can get what I want for the things that really matter. Like so, like just to give you a good example, um, like getting like I don't know, making sure I have a camera or something so I can do that because that really does matter to me. But not buying a bunch of clothes because that doesn't really matter to me. You know what I mean? Like so, kind of making these decisions so we can live the life we want to live. And I think most of us struggle with that because we're never taught it. And our society really emphasizes just buying junk all the time, having subscription services to everything. And it's like, are you really using all of them? It's like, I mean, how many apps are there that help people just go through their bills and find subscriptions that they're not using? It's insane. Like
Hmm.
ends up being a lot of money and stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's a great point. Is figuring out what stuff is important to you, because the narrative is, well, I don't know about being a girl, but I know being a guy, the narrative is, you're supposed to get a car and you're supposed to get a house and you're supposed to do all this stuff, and then you're supposed to go out and party with your friends and do all of it. And it's just like, yeah, but what if that's not you? Like I was victim to that
Mhm.
forever. And we talked about this all the time. How, like, when I was a kid, I knew what I wanted to do and I just did it. I played Dungeons and
Yeah.
Dragons, I painted little miniatures, and I've read fantasy books. Like, that's what I did as a kid. And
Yeah.
then I bought into this whole, like, you need to lift weights, you need to like cars, you need to do all this stuff. And I spent probably 10 years or more trying to do that stuff and just getting further and further off track until
Yeah. And
eventually
well,
just
I
came
think that's
back.
the other.
Yeah.
Oh no, I was gonna say it's a really good example too. I think of like not asking yourself the questions or not listening to yourself, right? And letting others, letting expectations, letting all that weigh on you. And I think that's where we get into that situation where even when we look back, we're unhappy because we weren't making decisions. So when we try to explain it to ourselves, it's like we have to pull on other people's ideas and their values rather than our own. I guess that's maybe what I guess that's maybe what it is, right? When we live intentionally and we look back, everything seems to fall into place. Even those times in our life when we weren't being authentic or weren't being ourselves, because that we see that now as a stage to get to where we were. Like for instance, like I know in my
Mm-hmm.
case, and I'm pretty sure for you too, as far as I know, I may know you fairly well. Even though you like for instance, even though you went to vet school and you did all that stuff, and you didn't really want to do it in hindsight, you're doing what you want to now. And so I'm sure when you look back, you see that just as part of your story now,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, because it is like, there's no getting around it. So you tell it to yourself probably in a positive way, but it's easier to tell a positive story about the past when we're doing what we want to do now. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? When you're living how you want to now. And I think that's kind of what I think about was so interesting is like so many people, and I see it so readily at college in college students because you don't know what the hell you're doing in college, and most of them are kind of being directed by things not beyond their own thoughts and own reasons, and it's like you just want to like shake them and be like, dude, don't do this then. Like think first and then do, because like if you don't make this choice yourself, like you're just going to be like so many other people. You're going to be working at 30 and be miserable, not know why, think you've done everything right, and then have to totally reassess your life.
Dude, I was going for a walk today, and I was thinking, I was like, man, I wasted so much time when I was younger. Like, so much time. I remember I remember back in, I think it was high school, like learning algebra, geometry, pre-calculus, and calculus. And I specifically remember, like, algebra did phenomenal on. Geometry did phenomenal on till about two-thirds of the way through the year. And then I started getting mocked because I was doing too well. So I was like, I want to be cool. So I'll just not care.
Oh,
So
yeah.
then I just like that, my whole attitude towards education at that point changed, where I was just like, I'll just do, I won't do as well because then I'll be cool. And I was like, man, I wasted so much time because I was so good at this stuff. And I just like
Yeah,
lost that whole opportunity just to be cool for some people who are probably working at the manager of freaking Burger King right now. You know?
yeah. Isn't that funny though, how like that happens? Like, people, and I think that's the worst time too, is like when we're in high school and stuff, because we're so sensitive to peer pressure, to clicks, to wanting to fit in, because you don't even know yourself yet, and you desperately want to be part of, whatever it is, and I think it is really hard, and it's a shame. I think that's another thing we don't teach our kids finances, and we don't teach them how to think for themselves. It's like it's really unfortunate that we do that, because I think it's stuff you have to figure out later in life. And if you do, I think that's why so many people, America is like the number one country for self-help stuff. And I think it's because, so many people realize later that they're like, this isn't what I want, And I
Because
mean, like,
we have
yeah,
nobody teaching us about it. Like there's no nuclear
no,
family. There's nothing
no.
anymore. And even if there is a nuclear family, we don't talk about that stuff because it's just like,
Yeah.
whoa. Yeah.
Wait, well, I think we might have mentioned it a while ago, but it's funny too, because like, there's also so many options and possibilities now, so many choices. Like before, you might have lived in a town that was going to be your place of birth and death, and your options, what your life path was probably pretty narrow. You might have some people that went way off the rails and went and did something really unique, but most people wouldn't have. And now I think it's like there's so much like potential possibility out there, so many different ways you can go, and it's like it makes it even it's like overwhelming.
Dude, it's the paradox of choice. It's hard to make a choice because you just have buyer's remorse as soon as you do. Happens to me all the freaking time. Like
Yeah,
that book, The Paradox of Choice. I think it was in that where they did the study where if you give people 6 choices of tomato sauce, they're more likely to buy than if you give them 40 choices. Because you give them 40
yeah,
choices and they're just overwhelmed and they're like, forget it. I don't even want to do this anymore. And that's the way we all
yeah.
get in life because there's so many freaking choices. We're just like, forget it. I don't have it. I don't have the energy.
Dude, I remember going to this one grocery store, and like literally the tomato sauce. I was like, when did they make so many freaking like artesian brands and all? There was like a million types. I was like, hell,
Dude, it's
like,
literally
what do
one
you do?
whole aisle. There's like you
Yeah.
go one side is all the pastas and the other side is all the tomato sauces. And it's just like, oh my goodness.
Dude, I thought your job was to curate this little for me. So I don't think about, yeah, it is funny though. It's overwhelming. Well, they always say that too. Like, I think it was Barack Obama. They said like when he got to the presidency, he got rid of all of his suits except for 2 colors because it just didn't have to think about that in the morning. You just
Yeah.
grab a suit, put it on, you're done.
I
You
even
know?
think I even think it's responsible for a lot of divorces. Because people, even if they may not have
Yeah.
the option, they think they have the option because they're like, oh, I could just download Tinder or I could, do this on eHarmony or they see all these people.
Yeah.
Whereas back in the day, like you were talking about, you live in a small village. There's like one or two available girls your age. That's it. You better
Yeah.
you better get one
Yeah.
of them, or else
If you're lucky.
you're gonna be all by yourself. Yeah.
What's funny too? I read a study that said that like they think like 60% of people back then were actually single because there just wasn't enough people to facilitate, like especially like in towns and stuff, like maybe cities and stuff. There wasn't enough people the same age to facilitate,
That's so
you know.
crazy.
Isn't it funny? Yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting because we always think back, like we always read stories and so we think of like everybody's being together and blah, but like it wasn't the case. It's kind of interesting.
Hmm.
Yeah, it is really funny, man. It's like this you have these overwhelming choices. It's like it's very hard to like, and there's also to that fear of like, even when you think you really like something, do you even know yourself enough to know that it's actually accurate, right? That fear that like maybe I made the wrong choice or blah blah blah, even if it's something you're kind of passionate about. And I think this is problematic too, because like you were saying that the thing you said about divorces too actually made me think of this, which is, you know, do we stick with things long enough as well to really get a good gauge? Because I was thinking like just learning something, I'll use programming because we're doing that now. You know, everything's exciting at first. It always is. And whether you stay excited, I think it is a good indicator of whether you're really interested in it. But there's always going to be hard times. And it's very easy to abandon things as soon as they get difficult and find the next fun thing. But you never really give yourself a chance to find out if you really are good at it. You never give you a chance really to become an expert. And you never really give yourself a chance to know if it really was right for you when you do that. And that's hard though, because it's also like, well, am I wasting time? And you get all, it's all these competing things.
Yeah, that's
Life's
a
hard.
that's the tough time to make the decision when you're in the thick of it. That's
Yeah.
the time when you want to make the decision when you're in the thick of it, but it's like the worst time to make the decision because
Yeah.
you're just subjected to it. But another thing that I heard in his Goodbye Things book was he was talking about our ability to predict the future, because we were just kind of talking about this here
Yeah.
about whether we think we'll like something or not. And so he talks about material possessions. So like people think, people can pretty accurately predict how they'll feel when they get the new iPhone
Yeah.
and use it the first time. Pretty accurately, people can predict that. But people can't predict how they'll feel the thousandth time they use it. And
That
because,
year later,
yeah,
like,
yeah. And because of that, we get stuck in this cycle of always wanting more, something new, something different, instead of actually focusing on what we have.
well, that's what's funny too. You look at like phone companies where they put out a new phone basically every 6 months because they know that. And it's funny to watch these people that continuously upgrade because it's like when you upgrade on that schedule, I mean, your increases are so marginal. And
Yeah.
I see it so often where people are super excited when they first get it, and then the next day they're like, "I hate this thing." It's like,
My phone's got
eh.
17 cameras. It's like
Dude, I know they're getting so the back's just all cameras now. It's
it's
really
gonna
funny.
look like a spider's eyes like blown up.
It is getting that way. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting though, because it's like yeah, I don't know. It's very interesting because I think one of the things that's helped me, and we talked about this before, with like we both love technology and like how we listen to ourselves. That's probably the direction we would have gone more, And I think it's something that's a lot of people don't do is listen to themselves. And I think it's like I find it more and more like I'm surprised at like how the things I do line up with like my core interests and stuff, even from when I was little. You know what I mean? Like, and that's a good indicator that you're doing the right thing.
Mm.
Like that,
Yeah.
if like deep down you just like enjoy it for whatever reason. I can't even explain it sometimes. I just like, it just interests me, and it's like that's fine.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's hard to do.
Hmm. Yeah, I just noticed this past week I was speaking pretty passionately about computers and stuff like that. Like somebody was asking me about it. They're like, aren't you bored of that stuff? And I was like, no, like this is
No,
incredible. It's
yeah,
like it's literally limitless. Like just the amount of stuff,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
limitless. You could just go forever and down any rabbit hole
yeah,
you want.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's super creative, and you're building things, and it's awesome. I love it. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just funny. Like but I think this is the hard thing. I think for that like for that healthy narrative and for us to look back and interpret things in that positive light, we have to live intentionally, which means we also have to listen to ourselves, which means we also have to give ourselves time to actually think and reflect and like get to know ourselves and like cut out the noise. And I mean, this is like it's almost like the world's against us. Like
Yeah.
society is actively working against us becoming ourselves. It's very
Oh, sure.
interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so here's something that I've been struggling with recently, talking about living intentionally, is like in trying so how do I put this? In trying to like intentionally do the things that I want to do, I also have to say no to a lot of stuff. And it's never a perfect balance, because like sometimes I'll have way too much to do and sometimes I'll have nothing to do. And I have a very hard time doing nothing because of all this momentum that I've built up, and like I have a hard time sitting still.
You don't want to lose it. Yeah.
And when these times come when there's just like not enough to fill my day, or not enough to fill my like, I don't even know if it's contentment or what it is, just like, when you're so busy doing stuff you don't even think if your life is okay, you're
Yeah.
just like so busy doing it. Like
Yeah.
when that's not happening and all of a sudden it's like there's a little bit of emptiness, what creeps in is this like, oh, I don't know if I'll be able to handle this in the future. Like, I don't know if I'll be able to do it in the future. And it's just,
Yeah, dude, of
and,
course.
and then like,
Uh,
and then around that, there's like this shame. I'm embarrassed that like, how can I be a man and not be able to handle my future? And it's just like this whole like complex that just happens around this stuff just because I don't have that much stuff filling my time.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. Okay, so first of all, I don't know that final thought. I don't know about that. I never associated with being a man with that, but that's okay. But the one about no, the idea of like, will I be able to do this in the future? It's funny because I find myself like I'll use the example of like just learning stuff because it's easier that way, but like with the programming stuff, like Like I was feeling really good about something the other day, and then I was looking at this other book, and I was like, oh my God, there's so much more to like, no, I can never do, like the thought just creeped in, like I can never do this. And like, but then like I stopped myself and I was like, okay, one, I totally can. I just need more time. And two, I really enjoy it. So why would I stop anyway? Who cares if I don't know everything? And in 2 years, I don't even know if this thing that I'm learning right now is going to be the thing that I focus on. It might be something else. But I think that thought naturally like kind of creeps in because it's the fear of the unknown. And we talk about all like we don't know what's going to happen in the future. And like you said, every choice you're always making decisions about, it always means you're choosing not to do stuff. I've thought about that a lot too, dude, because like, this whole boot camp and stuff, I've made a lot of decisions not to go see people and stuff because I haven't had time. And like you have to make that trade-off. And it's like, so there's always that fear in the back of your mind, like, is this right? Because if it's not, but I think that's where you have to just really double down with yourself, ask yourself, and like recommit to it.
Yeah. And here's the irony of it all, the kicker that I kind of got yesterday when I was writing in the morning is that so like I have this fear that I'm not going to be able to handle whatever comes in the future. And it comes
You'll be
up.
fine.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
know, but like that's what comes up and it's like when it
yeah,
comes up it's crippling. And so I have
yeah,
this fear that I won't be able to handle it, even though, I've handled everything that come up. But so like
yeah,
what I really want is security. The
yeah,
security to know that I'll be able to handle whatever comes up in the future. Go figure what I'm studying right now, cyber security.
yeah. You want to be secure.
I know,
That
right?
is funny. You know what I think it? I think it is that too, because it's funny. Like I think school kind of drills that into us, because you're like always afraid of failing, always afraid of not being good enough. And even if you are good enough, are you the top? Are you? It's like all these stupid measurements that don't even matter in the
Hmm.
real world. But it's hard to shake it. It stays with you, dude. It really does.
Oh yeah,
Like
you
I
could
think
get
that's
the
part
best
of
job
it.
ever, and it's like, yeah, but you're not at Google or Facebook or whatever. And it's like,
Yeah,
yeah, but who cares? Yeah.
who gives a shit? Yeah, and the other side of it, I think too, is like that's where like I really have noticed, at least for me personally, that's where like the habits and their routines have been really helpful because they give you that like I've noticed that like for me like um it gives you that extra level of normality and comfort with certain things so that even when things seem to go awry, you have control over your day. You know what you need to do still. You know what I mean? Like it's easier to just get it done and to get through that day, even when it's a bad day. And at least when I have those feelings, like I said, like I think one of the things I do is I remind myself how much I like it. I kind of like take a step back and try to remind myself that like, I really like it. Other people do it, I can do it. There's been no sign in the stars that I'll fail as of yet. You know what I mean? So like you might as well keep trying. And I think that's been helpful. I mean, those thoughts still come up. It's not like it's a cure-all or anything, but I think that's just natural. It is funny though how we question ourselves like that, and then like worry about it. And it's kind of stupid too, right? I mean, you are a doctor, inventor, you passed school no problem before, so there's clearly no indication that you can. I mean, there's a
And
clear indication that you can learn things. It's not like
and the funny thing is, like, I've sat down and I've been like, worst case scenario. Like, let's suppose I lose everything, I go insanely in debt, I end up in jail, I have every disease under the book. Like, let's just say worst case scenario, all this stuff happens. How would I survive? And I'm like, just like, you know, go start lifting at the gym, go read the library, like and look out my
do
little
something
window
new.
if I have one.
Yeah.
Yeah. And but it's just like I guess it's the unknown, or it's when you don't really question the thoughts. The thoughts come and automatically assuming that they're real as opposed to questioning them and being like, hang on, is that really true?
No, that's a good point because I think, in meditation, right, you're supposed to let the thoughts go because, that's one of our biggest problems is we attach to them as if they're real, right? So like that feeling of fear, that feeling of not being good enough, we immediately grab it and we make it into something big, right? By focusing on it and paying attention to it. So letting go is one tactic. Another tactic is, like you said, questioning. Like, is this actually the case? Or is this just like my inner fears, my inner insecurities, my inner, because we all have them. I mean, it's okay to admit that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I know I do. Like, I have plenty of things I'm afraid of, and like, but when you know that, it's easier to get through them. I think too, because you can just remind yourself to sit with it or just to ask those questions. Yeah, I think it's going.
Mm-hmm. So let's see, living intentionally in the present moment versus looking at it in the rearview mirror. Anything else you want to touch on?
I mean, I think that, it's funny. I just think it's just like it's funny how difficult it is sometimes to live and like how hard things are. But I guess the biggest thing I want to stress is like, but when you start doing things for the right reasons, I think that that narrative naturally falls into place, and things in the past start looking better because you're now doing your own thing. You know what I mean? Like it just naturally kind of falls into place, and just things keep getting. Like I've noticed it myself. As soon as you start taking control, things just keep getting better. And it's like even though there's hard times, even though there's difficulties, even though there's like they just keep progressively getting better. It's really interesting.
Yeah. I think I forget who this quote was from. It's from but it was something along the lines of if you do what you have to do when you have to do it, there will come a time when you can do what you want to do when you want to do it. And
That's interesting saying, yeah.
yeah, I definitely felt that because there was a long time when I had to do what I had to do being a veterinarian. Even though it wasn't for me,
Huh.
even though whatever, I had to dig myself out of student debt and like work on all that stuff so that I could then go on to do what I actually wanted to do.
But that's taking responsibility. That's recognizing what you want. And it's also just being honest with yourself. Okay, so yeah, I don't want to do this, but it's a means to an end right now. And it's a way out too. Because it
Mhm.
was a way out. It enabled you to get out from under the burden, and then have the freedom to do what you want. So in the end, it ended up being a good thing in a way. I mean, it caused your debt, but it also was the way out.
Yeah, right.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. So I guess in a nutshell, that is living intentionally and why things
think
always
for
look better in the
yourself.
rearview mirror.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is the Existential Stoic podcast. Make sure to check us out every week. I'm Randy. That's Danny. I'll see you later, Danny.
Later, Andy.